A grieving single dad opens his door on a stormy night to two shivering children whispering, "Our mama just died. Can we stay tonight?" What he says next changes all their lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe in the quiet magic of kindness and healing with love, subscribe, and let's walk this path together. The snow came down thick and heavy that night, burying the world in white silence. It clung to the crooked fence posts, softened the edges of the old farmhouse, and whispered against the window panes like ghostly fingers. Inside, Elijah sat by the fire, his calloused hands working a small piece of cedar with a carving knife. Each curl would fell to the floor like shavings of time, the little horse in his hands slowly taking shape. The air smelled of pine and smoke. The only sound was the occasional creak of the house settling in the soft, steady breathing of his son upstairs. Elijah paused, listening. It wasn't the kind of night for visitors, not with the wind gnawing at the world outside. Even the animals had gone still hours ago, huddled in the barn. Yet there was a sound so faint he almost convinced himself he'd imagined it. 3 knocks on the door. Hesitant, uneven, his knife froze mid-cut. He waited, heart pounding harder than it had any right to. Nothing but the wind. But then, another knock, softer this time, like whoever stood on the other side was losing courage. Elijah set the knife down on the table, his chair scraping against the wooden floor as he stood. His boots were heavy as he crossed the room, the fire's glow following him like an ember clinging to the dark. He hesitated with his hand on the latch. Nobody came out here unless they had to. When he opened the door, the cold knifed into him instantly, stealing his breath. Snow swirled in like a living thing. 2 children stood there, huddled together. The older one, a girl, couldn't have been more than 8. Her coat was thin, too small for her narrow shoulders, and her hair clung wet to her cheeks. Her arms wrapped tightly around a little boy, no more than 4, whose face was hidden against her chest. Both their shoes were soaked through, and their skin was pale with cold. Elijah's throat tightened. The girl's lips trembled as she tried to speak. "Our mama," she swallowed hard, staring up at it with eyes too wide for her small face. "Our mama just passed. Can we stay tonight?" Her voice broke on the last word, crumbling like ice underfoot. For a moment, Elijah couldn't find his voice. He looked past him into the dark, but there was no one else. No car, no footprints, but their own quickly filling with snow. "Come inside," he said hoarsely, stepping back. The girl hesitated, as though stepping over the threshold might somehow cost her something. Then she guided the boy forward. The warmth of the house hit them like a wave. The boy whimpered softly as Elijah shut the door against the storm. "Sit," Elijah said gently, gesturing toward the old couch by the fire. The girl lowered the boy onto the cushions and perched beside him stiffly, her hands resting protectively on his tiny shoulders. Her eyes flicked around the room, at the hearth, the carved wooden toys on the shelf, the old photographs in their frames, as though memorizing every detail in case it was all snatched away again. Elijah crouched to tug off their soaked boots, his hands working carefully so as not to startle them. Their socks were wet and thin. He set them aside near the fire to dry. "What's your name?" he asked softly, trying not to let his unease seep through. "Lila," the girl murmured. "This is Ben." "Lila, Ben." He nodded. "I'm Elijah." Ben peeked up then, his eyes glassy and red-rimmed, thumb pressed into his mouth. Elijah gave him a small, awkward smile before rising. "Stay there. I'll get you some blankets." In the linen closet, his hands shook as he gathered the softest quilts he could find. These kids weren't his responsibility. Not really. Someone should be called Sheriff Miles, or maybe social services in town. That's what a reasonable man would do. But as he returned and saw Lila clutching her brother, her small body rigid with fear, something deep in his chest pulled taut. Elijah draped one blanket around Ben's small frame, then another around Lila. She flinched slightly at his touch, then murmured a quiet, "Thank you." "You hungry?" he asked. She nodded once. He set a pot of soup on the stove to warm. The room filled with the scent of carrots and rosemary, but neither child relaxed. Lila's hand had drifted to her coat pocket where something crumpled, a letter maybe. but she didn't take it out. When Elijah set bowls of soup before them, Ben clutched a spoon like a lifeline, but Lila didn't eat it first. "You can," Elijah said gently. "There's plenty." She glanced at him, unsure, then took a small sip. Steam curled around her face like a veil. As they ate, Elijah leaned back against the counter. The firelight flickered, throwing soft shadows across the room. "How long have you been walking?" he asked quietly. Lila shook her head. "I don't know. Since this morning." The word sat heavy in the air. Elijah's son, Tommy, stirred upstairs, and a moment later the soft thump of little feet patted across the floor. "Daddy?" Elijah turned. "Hey, bud, go back to bed. It's late." Tommy rubbed his eyes and blinked at the couch. "Who are they?" Elijah crossed to his son and lifted him gently. "Friends who needed a warm place tonight." "Oh." Tommy rested his head on Elijah's shoulder, already drifting back to sleep. As Elijah carried him upstairs, Lila's voice followed, barely above a whisper. "Thank you for letting us stay." He paused at the top step, her words anchoring him. "You're welcome," he said softly, though part of him knew they both understood how fragile those words were. When he came back down, Lila was curled on her side, Ben pressed tightly against her. Both were already asleep, their faces softened by the fire's glow. Elijah pulled a chair close and sat there for a long time, watching the flames dance. He thought about his wife's words when she left years ago. "You don't let people in, Elijah. You never have." But here they were, two little souls who'd knocked on his door in the middle of a blizzard. And somehow, against every instinct that told him not to, he'd let them in. He leaned back and closed his eyes. In the silence, Ben murmured something in his sleep. Elijah couldn't make it out, but he felt the words all the same. As the fire cracked and the storm howled outside, he whispered to no one in particular. Just one night. But even as he said it, part of him knew it wasn't true. The house was quieter than it had been in years. Yet Elijah couldn't sleep. He sat in the rocking chair by the fire, the old wood creaking gently as he watched the flames rise and fall. Outside, the wind had softened, but snow still drifted down in fat, heavy flakes. His boots sat drying near the hearth, and his hands, restless, calloused, kept tugging at a loose thread on his cuff. On the couch, the children lay curled beneath the quilts, their bodies drawn tight with exhaustion. Lila hadn't moved since she'd drifted off, her arm protectively draped over Ben. He'd cried quietly in his sleep at first, but now even his breathing was steady, his small chest rising and falling in rhythm with the fire's glow. Elijah stared at them, a knot tightening in his chest. They didn't belong here, not in this house, not in his life. And yet there they were, two little souls carried to his door by the storm. He rubbed his face with both hands. This wasn't what he did. He wasn't a man who opened doors or held out hands. He could almost hear his ex-wife's voice, soft but cutting. "You don't know how to let people in, Elijah. Not really. You just watch life happen from the sidelines." But those kids, he couldn't turn them away. The clock on the mantel ticked softly. He forced himself to his feet and stoked the fire before heading to the kitchen. The kettle hissed faintly as he filled it. Tea might calm him. He needed something to settle the gnawing ache in his chest. When he turned, he found her standing there. Lila. She was barefoot, her small frame wrapped in the blanket he'd given her. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and her eyes, those two old eyes, watched him silently. "You should be sleeping," Elijah said softly, careful not to frighten her. "I know," she whispered back. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The kettle began to murmur. Elijah turned to pull off the stove. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. Lila shook her head. "Ben's warm now. I didn't want to wake him." Her fingers tightened on the edge of the blanket. "Do you have a phone?" The question surprised him. "I do." "Could you call someone?" "For us?" Elijah swallowed. "Who would I call?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. A faint tremor passed through her lips, but she held it in. "Never mind," she murmured. He watched her for a moment, unsure what to say. Then he poured a second mug of tea and set it on the counter near her. "It's chamomile. Helps me sleep sometimes." Lila eyed it warily but stepped forward. Her fingers were pale and slender as she wrapped them around the warm ceramic. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome." He leaned against the counter, folding his arms. "Where were you two headed?" "I don't know." Her voice was so quiet, he almost missed it. "Mama said we should walk until we found someone kind." Elijah's chest ached. "She said that?" Lila nodded, staring into the tea like it might offer answers, her lips pressed tight as though holding back words. "She was sick," Lila whispered after a moment. "She said it would be quick. She wrote a letter." Her small hand drifted to her coat pocket. The letter. He'd noticed her clutching it earlier. "Do you want me to read it?" Elijah asked gently. Lila hesitated, then shook her head sharply. "Not yet." "That's all right." He didn't press. They stood in silence for a long while, the house settling around them. Somewhere upstairs, Tommy let out a soft sigh in his sleep. "You know," Elijah said finally, "you don't have to worry about tomorrow yet. One thing at a time." Lila's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. That's what Mama used to say. When she finished her tea, Elijah took the mug from her hands. "You should rest now." "I'm scared we won't wake up here," she admitted, her voice breaking. Maybe this is a dream." "It's not a dream," Elijah said softly. "When you wake up, you'll still be here." She studied his face for a long moment, then gave a small nod and padded back to the couch. Elijah watched her settle beside her brother, tucking the blanket up to her chin. He didn't move until her breathing evened out again. In the quiet, he felt the weight of it all pressing down, the storm, the children, the unspoken questions. What was he doing? What would he do tomorrow? He didn't have answers. But he knew one thing. They weren't going back out into that snow. Not tonight. When Elijah finally climbed the stairs to check on his son, Tommy was still asleep, clutching his stuffed rabbit to his chest. Elijah brushed a stray curl from the boy's forehead and stood there a moment longer than usual, the warmth of the room settling deep into his bones. At dawn, he woke to the sound of soft giggles drifting up from the kitchen. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. When he padded downstairs, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, he found all three children sitting cross-legged on the floor, a pile of wooden animals spread between them. Tommy was holding up the carved horse Elijah had left unfinished last night. "Did you make this?" Lila asked, glancing up at Elijah. "I did." "It's beautiful," she said simply. He felt his ears grow hot. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Ben handed Tommy a broken crayon. "We're coloring them," he announced solemnly, as if this was the most important job in the world. Elijah couldn't help but smile faintly. "Breakfast," he said. "Let's make something hot." Lila started to rise. "I can help." "No," Elijah said gently. "You three play. I've got this." As he cracked eggs into a skillet, the sound of laughter behind him felt strange and familiar all at once, like a room waking from a long sleep. And when Lila finally placed her mother's folded letter on the table, sliding it toward him with trembling hands, Elijah realized this wasn't just a storm passing through. This was the beginning of something he wasn't sure he could stop. The storm didn't let up the next day, or the day after that. The world beyond the windows blurred into white and gray, the horizon lost beneath swirling drifts. Icicles clung stubbornly to the eaves, lengthening as the hours crawled past. Inside the house, time moved differently, slower, gentler, as if the blizzard had wrapped the old farmhouse in a cocoon. Elijah stood at the kitchen sink, staring out at the frozen yard. The chicken coop had vanished beneath a heavy blanket of snow. Only the tip of the fence posts poked through like sentinels. His hands were wet from washing dishes, but he hadn't noticed the water running cold until it bit into his knuckles. Behind him, faint laughter bubbled from the living room. Ben's giggles. Elijah turned, drying his hands on a rag as he watched from the doorway. The boys sat cross-legged on the rug, stacking Elijah's carved wooden animals into precarious towers. Each time they toppled, he burst into fresh laughter, clapping his small hands together. Tommy knelt opposite him, brow furrowed in concentration as he carefully lined up the horses in a neat row. Lila sat nearby, her back straight and legs tucked beneath her. She wasn't playing. She seemed older than her years even in stillness, but her lips curved faintly as she watched the two boys. It was the first time Elijah had seen her smile. He cleared his throat softly, and 3 pairs of eyes flicked up to him. "Who's hungry?" Ben's hand shot into the air. "Me." "I'm making bread," Elijah said. "Think you can help me?" Ben scrambled to his feet instantly. "Yes, I'm a good helper." Tommy jumped up too. "I can help, Daddy." Lila hesitated, glancing between her brother and Elijah. "You too, if you want," Elijah said gently. She nodded, rising quietly and smoothing her dress. In the kitchen, Elijah pulled a mixing bowl from the shelf and set out flour, salt, and yeast. The children crowded around the table, their small faces lit with curiosity. "Wash your hands first," Elijah said, pointing to sink. Ben stood on tiptoe as Lila lifted him, so he could reach the tap. Warm water spilled over their fingers, and for a moment, Elijah caught a flicker of tenderness in the girl's eyes. Something fierce and fragile all at once. "All right," Elijah said once they returned. "Lila, pour in the flour. Tommy, you stir. Ben, you get to knead later." Ben beamed. They worked in companionable silence. The snowstorm muted against the thick-paned windows. Elijah watched their small hands move, the way Lila poured carefully, the way Tommy's tongue poked out as he stirred, the way Ben's fingers flexed impatiently, eager to dig into the dough. "You've done this before?" Elijah asked Lila. She gave a small nod. "Mama liked baking. Said it made the house smell like home." Elijah's chest tightened. She sounded like she was a good woman. She was. Lila's voice was quiet, but steady. He didn't press further. When the dough was ready, he floured the table and let Ben pound it with both fists. The boy laughed loudly, his cheeks flushed with delight. Tommy joined in, and soon the kitchen filled with giggles and the warm, yeasty scent of rising bread. Elijah stood back, watching. Something about the scene stirred a memory he hadn't thought of in years. His late wife humming softly as she kneaded dough, her fingers dusted white. She'd once said she wanted a house full of children, the kind of home where laughter outnumbered silence. The ache in his chest sharpened. That evening, as the loaf baked and the house filled with its rich scent, Elijah took Lila's coat and sat by the fire. The tear in the fabric near the pocket needed mending. He found a sewing kit in the drawer and began stitching carefully. The thread tugged smoothly through the material, each pull steady and deliberate. Lila sat nearby, watching with wide eyes. "You didn't have to fix it," she said softly. "I know." "Why are you—" Elijah paused. "Because it needed fixing." She studied him for a long moment, then lowered her gaze, her small hand smoothing the blanket in her lap. After dinner, Elijah carried Tommy upstairs to bed. The boy was heavy with sleep, his head resting on Elijah's shoulder. He pulled the covers up to his chin and brushed a stray curl from his forehead. When he came back down, Lila was tucking Ben onto the couch, humming softly to him. It wasn't quite a melody, just a quiet sound like the memory of a song. Elijah crouched by the hearth, adding another log to the fire. "Do you think Mama's warm now?" Lila asked suddenly. Her voice caught him off guard. He turned and found her eyes on him, dark and searching. "I think she is," Elijah said gently. "And I think she wants you to be warm too." Lila didn't answer right away. Her fingers stroked Ben's hair absently. "Are we leaving when the snow stops?" she whispered. Elijah's jaw tightened. He should say yes. That would be the smart thing, the safe thing. But when he looked at her, this girl holding her brother like a mother too young for the role, he couldn't bring himself to say the words. "We'll see," he said quietly. Outside, the wind howled against the windows, but inside the house, the storm felt distant. Later, after the children had drifted into sleep, Elijah stood at the window, staring out into the endless white. His reflection stared back at him, shadowed and uncertain. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew this. They weren't just passing through anymore. The storm finally broke on the 4th morning. When Elijah stepped onto the porch, the air smelled clean and sharp, the sky a pale blue brushed with streaks of gold. Snow still covered the earth in heavy drifts, but the wind had stilled, leaving the world hushed and glistening. For a long moment, he stood there in his heavy coat, boots sinking into the icy crust, watching a single crow sweep across the horizon. The house behind him felt alive in a way it hadn't for years. Children's laughter drifted faintly through the open door. He hadn't called social services yet. Every time his hand hovered over the phone, something in his chest seized tight. The thought of letting them go, of sending Lila and Ben away to strangers, it felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain. When he stepped back inside, the warmth of the fire greeted him like an embrace. The children were crowded around the kitchen table. Tommy and Ben were bent over sheets of paper, crayons scattered between them. Lila sat nearby, carefully folding a scrap of colored paper into the shape of a bird. "Where'd you learn to do that?" Elijah asked. Lila glanced up, startled, then gave a shy smile. "Mama taught me. She said if you fold 100 cranes, you can make a wish. Do you believe that?" "I don't know." She smoothed the paper's wings. "But it feels nice to try." Elijah nodded, his throat tight. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter, watching them. Tommy was explaining something to Ben about horses, his little hands gesturing wildly. Ben nodded solemnly, as if memorizing every word. "Mr. Elijah?" Lila's voice was quiet but steady. He turned to her. "Do you know if anyone's coming for us?" Elijah's grip tightened on his mug. "What do you mean?" I wonder if there's somewhere else we're supposed to go." He exhaled slowly. "You were supposed to come here." Lila tilted her head. "Just for the storm?" He set the mug down carefully. The question lingered in the air, heavier than the scent of coffee and firewood. "That's what I thought at first," Elijah admitted. "But maybe it isn't just a storm." She studied him, her dark eyes searching his face. "Do you want us to leave?" she asked softly. "No," Elijah said before he could think better of it. The word felt like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples through the room. Lila looked down quickly, blinking hard. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded another crane. "Daddy," Tommy piped up, "can Lila and Ben stay forever?" The question startled Elijah, though he supposed it shouldn't have. "Yeah," Ben echoed. "Forever." Elijah walked over and crouched beside them, his knees creaking. He rested a hand on the table, fingers brushing a pile of crayons. "Lila," he said gently, "when you came here, you asked if you could stay one night. Do you remember?" She nodded, silent. He took a breath. "I'd like it if you stayed forever." For a moment, no one moved. Then Lila's hands flew to her face, and she let out a sound, small and broken, that made Elijah's chest ache. He reached out, resting a tentative hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he murmured. "You're safe now." Ben climbed into his sister's lap, wrapping his little arms around her as she cried softly into his hair. Tommy looked up at Elijah with wide eyes. "Does that mean they're my brother and sister now?" Elijah swallowed hard. "If they want to be." Ben's head popped up. "I do." Lila nodded into her brother's shoulder, still unable to speak. That afternoon, Elijah drove into town with all 3 children bundled in the cab of his old truck. The roads were icy, but the sun was out, melting snow into rivulets that sparkled along the ditches. At the courthouse, he asked for the forms to begin the process. It wouldn't be simple. Nothing worth doing ever was, but as he signed his name on the first page, he felt a weight lift from his chest. When they returned to the farm, the children tumbled out of the truck, their boots crunching on the icy gravel. Tommy and Ben raced toward the barn, their laughter ringing out across the yard. Lila lingered by the truck, holding a folded piece of paper. "Can I show you something?" she asked. Elijah nodded. She handed him the paper. It was a letter from her mother, edges worn and smudged with fingerprints. He read it carefully, his throat tightening at the simple, desperate words. "If you're reading this, I'm gone. Please be kind to them. They're good kids, better than I deserve." At the bottom, in careful pencil strokes, was something new. "We found home." Elijah looked up. Lila's eyes were shining, but there was no fear in them now. He folded the letter carefully and handed it back. "Yes," he said softly. "You did." That night, as the fire crackled and the house settled into quiet, Elijah sat in his chair, whittling a new figure, A small bird, its wings spread as if ready to take flight. When he placed it on the mantel beside the little horse, he felt the house breathe easier around him. For the first time in years, it felt full, and for the first time in his life. So did he?